Okay. Well, I guess I'll introduce everybody. Good morning. My name is Andrew Anderson. I'm the program coordinator at Big Medium, and I'm happy to welcome you to Coffee Chats, where we feature leaders in the creative community, sharing their personal and professional experiences to inspire others pursuing careers in art. Today, we have Rakhee Jain Desai and Alexandra Robinson. Rakhee Jain Desai, hopefully I said that correctly, is an interdisciplinary artist whose work creates a dialogue about immigrant identity and belonging. Her current body of work utilizes the centuries-old wax textile technique called Batik. Rakhee is exhibited across the US, Singapore, and Portugal. Alexandra Robinson grew up in the military and has lived all over the world. Because of this semi-transient nature of moving, every 2 years, she has a longing for place and identity and explores these themes in her work. She currently teaches at St. Edward's University and exhibited throughout the country and internationally. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start the questions. I wanted to say thank you to Big Medium and Andrew. Thank you for having us. Rakhee and I met at the beginning of the pandemic, like right before the pandemic started in January of 2020, when we were 2 of 8 of the participants in the CRIT group through the Contemporary Austin. And so what I thought we could do is like start off talking about our like first impressions. So the way that the CRIT group worked was you would get 2 critiques. So you have one sort of at the beginning where you share your work, and it's kind of really green at that time for all of us looking at work for the first time. And then the second critique, we've sort of have more experience with each other's work, and so we're looking at it slightly differently. But I remember, Rakhee, the first time I saw your work, you were at Canopy, right? You had that space at Canopy where you were put up your work, and you had this like variety of pieces. So you had sort of traditional painting, and then you had these larger batik pieces. But specifically, I remember the pieces that had elements that were like coming off of the canvas or the sort of surface, or and you had a couple of those, but the one I remember most specifically, and I wanted to ask you about, was the one that was sort of centralized, and it was like hanging fabric, and then it had a sort of an element that came down, and there was a like a sculptural object sort of on the ground that sort of created this dialogue between like the ground or the floor and that piece. And I was curious about that because I think that was like a new something new for you, right? Like to get off, like completely off the wall.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was the start of the direction that I've been wanting to take, and was really exploring kind of how to do that, which is more of it, allowing the element of the batik work to show through on both sides. I think that is something that I've always been drawn to, is the translucence of the wax. And even after it's removed, it creates, visibility from both sides, where you can kind of see through it. And I wasn't playing around with that before, because usually, I would mount the work in a 2D form. And I was just wanting to explore that. And I wanted to explore also it more of the batik in a sculptural context, and allow it to be experienced from all angles. So I remember you being, you commenting on that during that CRIT. And and also there was a piece that I had that was like kind of draped over this pedestal.
Yeah.
That I had treated in wax. And that was something also that was kind of taking a sculptural form at the time.
Was that, you also included, or you had a sculptural wax piece in the second CRIT too, right?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. I didn't think about this until like literally just now, but so at the end of the summer of last summer, I started making, like I had been doing all that cyanotype stuff, and I had all these scraps, and I wasn't really sure like what to do. So I started stitching them all together, and I ended up like cutting text out. But I kept thinking about like those like wax as a preservative. Like I think there's like I can't think of what it's called, but a jacket that's worn in like England that is like it's waxed as a way to sort of keep the wind and the rain out of the coat. And I started waxing all this text
Yeah.
as a way to like,
Kind of like
I didn't
oil,
really think of it.
right? Like, was it?
Yeah. Kind of like oilcloth. Yeah. But it's interesting because so the other thing that I also really liked, and I think it sort of further developed in that second crit of work, and I think it's in the work that you shared at Grey Duck, was leaving the wax and like how it affected the relationship of fabrics, because you weren't just making batik fabric, you were also using like found fabric. So were you like stitching these pieces together, or like treating them as one? If you were you like waxing both?
I wasn't waxing the found fabric, and I haven't yet done that yet. The found fabric, I guess it was like a reverse preservation then, like I didn't want to preserve it with the wax.
Yeah.
Because I wanted it to be in its natural state. And a lot of the fabrics that I did find, and I think one of them was my mom's engagement sari in that work. I didn't want to alter it, I didn't want to alter what it is. And I didn't want to alter some of the stuff that I was finding. So I think that any of this stuff, for some reason, I have an aversion to waxing the found fabrics, which is really weird, I guess. Yeah. So, and maybe it makes sense. I don't know, but it's, and just allowing it to not be in an altered state, and the work that I create, like, I feel like I want to manipulate it in any which way. Like I have the license to do that. Whereas with the found fabrics, I don't feel like I have the authority to do it.
Can you talk about like how like because so in the original critique we saw like objects, like fully formed sort of sculptural things and draped pieces, but you kind of left the objectness of the shaped filled like pieces behind and sort of moved specifically to like the draping of fabric. Can you talk a little bit about like why the draping, or like the install like throughout the space?
Yeah. I think what was happening at that point was, and I think, you and I had talked about this before, which is like where I was going emotionally with the work, right? And I think for me, what started off like in the year 2020 as like a critique of all the tradition and what I've been communicated, from my parents' generation and the previous generation about my heritage and traditions. It was always under scrutiny and critique. And then that evolved into this like a real like feeling of vulnerability, of losing it, right? And it's just because it was now ancestral land is very far, it's inaccessible. Generations that were at risk and during the pandemic, older generations were at risk. And so the critique moved on into this wanting to hold on to something. And it came from a place of really wanting to understand it. Mm-hmm. And so as I found the fabric, I was actually unconsciously creating my memories back from growing up of going back to India. So, I think Saul Jerome mentioned that, it reminds him of like, the Philippines and their low hanging places and low walls and walking around things and, navigating through them. I think, when he said that during the critique, I was like, oh yeah, that's true. Like, I didn't even realize that's what was happening. And, but I think it's just, there's always been this beauty of going through the little alleys and this fascinating part for me of like what you're going to find. And also, and actually yesterday, as I was talking to my husband about the batik process, and I feel like that there's a parallel to the batik process as well, because like, when you're working with batik, you're also using the wax to cover certain places, but you don't really know what you're going to find after you wash it out. Or you kind of have an idea, but you can't see it right there, you know, so you're making those marks, and then eventually when you wash it away, you know, do the rinse, there is some element of surprise. And so that is also kind of possibly why I use batik in that way, and then also why I decided to go in the hanging form, because I wanted the maze-like element of surprise, you know, just to walk through it.
Oh, I like that. That's interesting, because I never thought about that. The cyanotype does that too. Like, I can brush it on fabric and I know, like, I can cover the fabric, but then when I start laying elements down, whatever that might be, if they're flat, I have a better sense of like the coverage, right? But if it's dimensional, then I'm subject to like how the sun is creeping around this object, because I develop everything in the sun. And so to me, there is an element of surprise, like you never really know what you're going to get. And I think I like that aspect, at least of this process.
Can you tell me more about the process, like more of a detailed about that?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a photographic tradition. I mean, it's an alternative photographic process, and I am coming at it from the perspective of like capturing a thing in the place that it exists. So I recently, like, I took my kids to go get tintypes made with, like, I think Adrian Whip, like with Lumiere, and he described the way that photographic process happens, where it's the light in the room that's developed directly to the plate. There's no negative. And so it is an object that sort of records that moment in like at that time with that temperature. And like, conceptually, I think that's really interesting. And I didn't make the connection right off the bat, but I think it's also one of the reasons why I'm so attracted to the tintype. But the batik, or the cyanotype, is very similar. Like, I started doing them like alone when I was at a residency in Kansas. And so this idea of like, it was a residency at the Tallgrass Prairie, and there's like 2% of the prairie left. And the prairie goes from like the Dakotas all the way down to Austin. And so I was sort of thinking about like migrations of family from my mother's side over time. And like, is there a way that I could capture like place and time, like without shooting a photograph, or like making a drawing? And so these, like, using like elements from that place, the dirt from that place, whatever that might be, to sort of act as the resist. I really liked. But basically I'm painting the cyanotype liquid onto pieces of canvas, or like I'm using muslin, and then you let it dry, and then you expose it, and then you rinse it with water. I mean, it's a pretty simple process. I actually have some in my purse if it gets sunny today. So one thing that's sort of interesting, I think, that with your work is like the found saris, like not being able to alter them, or doing batik on other fabric that already has pattern, like, because it creates this whole other level of layering. And that's actually one of the things I really liked about that piece that you had at Grey Duck, was like, it's very complicated. Like, you don't necessarily know what you're looking at. And so this latest thing that I'm going to process is a piece of patterned fabric that's a different color. So I don't know. We'll see how it could be a fail, but I have no idea.
Oh, you see it.
Yeah.
It sounds really interesting. So is there a resist with the cyanotype?
Not so much like with the wax, but it's like the object. So like if you have a surface that has been treated, then you're like literally like putting like something on it, and whatever's on the fabric will keep sunlight or UV light from developing the cyanotype. And so anywhere that it was, the sunlight or the UV light didn't alter the cyanotype, it will wash away to the color of the fabric. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. So I'm sort of curious. We've talked a lot about this. A lot of people have, but we experience crit group in a slightly different way, because usually I think it's like a 9-month experience, right? And then there's like the group show. But because we had the pandemic, we kind of extended ours. And so we did some things like online. We got to meet up in person right before. I remember meeting at, like, Sean had us meet at the farmer's market, which was really cool because I had not been to the Mueller farmer's market. But I was curious, like, what happened to, like, your practice, or like, how did you manage to sort of sustain?
Yeah, well, I've actually, during the great group, I was actually expressing this to everybody that, if it wasn't for the community that we had, which is the Creek group, I don't know how I would have sustained a practice. I don't even know if I
Yeah.
would have. And I think it's almost like what saved me, like in a lot of ways. I mean, it was the ability to have those deadlines, and I know that I need to present something, have something to present, so that I would continue working. I mean, that was the only thing um, that kept me going, and so I struggled to make. I think there's a lot of us when we met in the middle of the Crit group, like I remember, like even up until June, we were all like, oh, we can't do anything. It's really hard to
Yeah.
now, and with the change of our schedules and everybody at home and just everything being in upheaval, and there was just too much anxiety. I mean, I just remember not being able to do anything but just eat chips and salsa.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that saved me was Mass Gallery was trying to figure out what they were going to do, and they let me use their gallery as a studio. I made a lot of work, like between June and July. I don't even know how long I had it. I didn't have it for very long, but they were so generous. I think they're still allowing some people to use it as a studio space since, but yeah, I mean, I was nervous because that second crit, it was like very clear. Andrea and Sterling and Annette were like, this, you should have new work. Like, we don't want to see the others. We want to see what you're, so I feel like that was helpful to light a fire under us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because like at that point, your second crit, that's when you started stringing like the wire across the expanse of the space, and like really draping the saris and the other batik fabrics to create like that sort of walk-through experience, like what Saul Jerome was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were just talking about this just a few minutes ago. It was like that permission to do something, right? And I think allowing yourself the permission to do something and take a chance is something that I think artists might really struggle with. I mean, I struggle with it all the time. Like, it has to be a certain way to make it worthy of being visible, and I think if I were to continue to do this work, if it wasn't a crit, and if it was something that was further like an exhibit or something, sorry, then it would really be, I don't know if I would have stopped where I stopped. And I liked that I stopped where I stopped, and where it was just this format of rawness that I really appreciated. Whereas maybe I would have continued to go, and then it wouldn't have been the product that I would have wanted. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about that before. Like, how do you know when to
yeah.
stop? Like, how do you know when to stop? Or yeah.
And it has to be a
Yeah.
little more packaged, a little more, or that's what I was thinking. And then at that point, like allowing myself to, or giving myself the permission to allow it to be raw was something that I didn't allow myself to do before.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel about that Ouroboros piece. Like, I literally forgot that it was in my car, and then I was like, oh wait, I have this like circle thing. I don't know what it is.
Yes, and that was amazing when you pulled. So Alex did this. It's called Serpentino, right?
Yeah.
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 And you pulled it out, and you had not even shown it to us. When you pull that piece out and threw it like in the middle of the parking lot, we were all staring at it like thinking, that's amazing, and and giving yourself the permission to just do that, I think, was very liberating also in the crate group. And I think that at that point we were just ready to do it, because we were just all kind of like, oh, forget it. Just, this is what I have. This is what I was able to do. And And I think having that ability to show yourself in that way is actually really extraordinary. And and having the crit group last year, I think really allowed us to do it.
Yeah.
Where everyone was just run ragged, like emotionally or just with everything that was, happening at home or whatever, it just all culminated in just allowing us to just expose ourselves.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm kind of like, I don't even know what to do with that piece still. Like, I still think about it and I'm like, I don't understand. I mean, I understand it, but I'm like, how did I make a thing when I was making like something else, Anyway, I keep coming back to it. I'm working on some like pillows, basically. I'm making some pillows right now, which I don't understand either, but they're just like little, like, I don't, rocks. They look like little pillow rocks. I don't know. But it's in my mind, it's like the liberation to do that is directly related to that like sculptural round circle piece that I made last year. So it's weird, but I'm really curious where else I'll go. Like, there's other things that we could talk about, but I was wanting to ask you about, you talk about like heritage, and I'm really curious about your like previous professional life. Because to
Oh,
me, it seems to like directly inform your practice. Like, so, because right now you're like interviewing like your aunties and like the women in your family or like familial circle, and like talking about, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could talk about that, but I think like you're sort of investigating like how they are taking a cultural identity and a way of being in the world and
yeah.
sort of doing it here in the US. And like you're very much like general like American, but you have this like other experience too, and sort of how those things come together. But I think your experience in marketing and like research directly informs that. And I think it's like really an interesting way of thinking about your practice.
Yeah, that's interesting that you want to talk about that. But I would love to talk about it. I mean, basically, I don't have an art education, and we were talking about this and how I would really love like an art education, but that's a different topic. But the the marketing side of it, I was in advertising and a market researcher, and when I was living in Asia, I was an ethnographer. So I would be going into homes in Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand. We did some studies in Pakistan. I wasn't actually allowed as an Indian American citizen into Pakistan. Well, I mean, they didn't think it was safe for me to be there, but I would have loved to go. But we did a lot of studies even there, and they were all consumer products. But the fascinating thing while they were consumer products, they really did get to observe lifestyle and people. And actually through those travels is when I started seeing the Batik in Indonesia. And it's also very apparent among the Hmong people in Thailand and in China and Vietnam. And that actually, like that methodology of speaking to people and then documenting and transcribing and documenting the conversations I heard has helped me in my research of what I would like to do moving forward. And that is, now because I feel like there's like a shortened amount of time. Like I've got to get this information in the next 10 years for the community that pretty much raised me. I mean, and I'm specifically interested in the female diaspora because that's really, really important to me as I see the woman I am now and what I want, the mother that I've into my children and what I want them to carry forward. Because the women of that generation, which is the Indian American generation, South Asian American generation, that came here as immigrants, they're the ones that really preserve the culture, or what I saw was the preservation of culture and passed it on. I think most often, the men were the breadwinners and doing what they needed to do and coming home, in the evenings. But it was the women, like the heroes that really kind of carried forward all of the different beliefs and value systems and culture that now I think my generation will try to carry forward. Like, I don't know, we don't know how much of that's going to happen, and everyone always cherry picks what they're going to give to their kids based on the filter that
Right.
we see. I mean, you and I were talking about this in your work as well. I mean, with your
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, I think about like a Latinx experience. I actually don't always know what that means anymore. Mine is definitely informed from the perspective of like growing up in the military. So whenever we would go anywhere, we're like coming home to my grandmother's house here in Texas, and the sort of social structure and patriarchy was like super evident, and I did not relate. And also I didn't relate just because it's not how my mother raised me. But when we would come home, it was definitely the way that we functioned. And so I was like always conflicted, like, how is she doing this if this is. And so now I definitely think about it differently. I have a different level of respect for it. And I think like about whatever the things that my family has given me in terms of being able to kind of choose, like the permission to choose, I guess, what I want to do is important. I do think it's interesting living here now. I've never lived here. I've always visited. And so I, that is a different experience, clearly because I live here, but like, I've always functioned as a true outsider whenever I would come to visit family and things. And now I'm kind of in it, but I also still feel like I'm on the outside looking in. But I feel the same way. Like I'm constantly asking my parents. I think I told you in earlier conversations, like I took a history of Latinx studies class sort of at the beginning of the pandemic, and it went online. And every day after the class, I would call my mom, and I'm like, so this thing that we talked about today, this is why you did da 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 da. And she's like, yes. And I was like, oh, like I just have a totally different. So this is like language, acquisition of Spanish. Really, she speaks Spanish. She only spoke Spanish when she went to school, but like that's not how my brother and I were raised. And then, and so there's like lots of little things like that. So like coming back to culture as an adult, yeah, I think we totally cherry pick. But I also think we do it in reverence, right? Like in reverence of history and family and tradition. And because like we've talked about this a little bit, but like giving our children, you know, giving our children something in the future, but we're also like questioning and critiquing it in our own work.
Yeah.
It's a strange conflict.
It just occurred to me, my dad and my sister are on this call, so just want to tell you that. But I saw my parents' generation actually like kind of go up cherry pick in 3 different buckets. And
Okay.
so it was like either they were preserving, like they're trying to preserve some part of their culture, so like they would drop that in there, right? Or they were trying to integrate, or they were trying to assimilate. And I think that those were all 3 different, very different things. It's kind of trying to prove yourself in all these different ways. Like I am so Indian. No, I belong here. Oh, I'm just like you. Like all these, there's a spectrum of different things that they were just kind of dropping into the buckets. And then we got that package, of whatever that was. And for every family, it was different, because, right? Because they got to, like, how much they put in one bucket was very different. And then the result of that was how I see myself as South Asian American, right? Which whatever combination, like I think my husband had a very different combination. And then with that, I either rejected it or accepted it. Just like you're saying with patriarchal views, you either accept it or reject it. And also you see the way your mom or your parents have accepted or rejected something, and then you question why they did that, and then what happens when they're trying to actually I don't know if it's like showing face, or like I don't know if it's like what it is when you would go back to family or traveling back to family.
Yeah.
Things would change, right? Because the context changed in what they were living in the US versus
Yeah.
it was the US, but it was going back and it was just when you were immersed in with family.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because like I think like the work I make right now, especially I mean, I wonder where in like not thinking about it too much, like the direction that it will go, but like I definitely think about what it means to be like a Mexican American, or even like what language you want to use, because it's like so coded in different political strata, or like I don't, and I've said this to you before, like I was so shocked that watching the news, just people that look like people in your family or look like you, that's crazy. That's not a big deal in the normal scheme of things, but when you've never seen an entire like production company, like people that are giving you the news and the weather and the sports, like all look like people that you're related to, that's wild. I never really thought about it before because it's like, you're always going a million miles an hour for everything else, but it's one of the things that sort of gave me pause a few years ago, and then I started to think about it a lot in relationship to like how I navigate the world, or I don't know. So yeah, and I think about like the work that I've been making is like trying to figure out how I can be all of those things, because I am all of those. I shouldn't apologize for any of it, right? It's just awareness that I get to carry forward. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
There's a dimensionality to it, multidimensionality to it, that definitely, I don't think it means apologizing.
Yeah. Well, and I also think like even the way like both of us have lived all over the world and had different experiences with different people, like because of that, I think we have a unique perspective that is a little bit more open, maybe, or hopefully it is. I hope it is.
Maybe. I hope so
Yeah.
too. Do you I want to know more about your sound pieces and
Oh
how
yeah.
you started integrating, like how that all came together. I really love your sound pieces, so I want to know more about that.
Okay. I don't really so I think I started making them in like 2016, and I my whole life, when not any really different than other people, but like going to national parks.
Mhm.
But my dad was like a big uh, battlefield guru. He's like a historian, so we would always go to like any battlefield that was around. And a few years ago, we took the kids out west to Fort Davis, and I've been to Fort Davis before,
Yeah.
but this time I was like sitting at this table with like a Morse code translator, and I was like, oh, this is like all these, I don't know, all these things sort of came together at once. And I started sort of tapping out little signals, and they were kind of like saying your name out loud kind of thing, or like making statements, but in a way that was coded. And so it was like only a certain few could get the message, or the message was tangled up in translation, and so there was no way to get the message. And I sort of feel like there's a relationship in that sort of confusion with also how we sort of navigate how we exist in the world in terms of like the complexity of a person.
Mm-hmm.
And but there's like a Morse code translator online, so I could like type in anything and then I could get it back in Morse code, and I could alter it and change it. And so then I started, and it was pretty simple at first. It was just like kind of one for one. And then eventually I started taking them into like an editing software and layering them and building like little chords and things. So like the most recent piece I did was at ICOSA for their transmissions exhibition. And so I had like a call out for people to submit their name as a way to like, because it was based on like that particular project was based on oh God, now I'm not going to remember, but it was like from the preamble of the Constitution about we are all one kind of thing. That the gist of that is like, so in the collection of the names, if we hear them at once, they are one kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I would build and stagger, but I don't know, they're getting kind of, I've done lots of things with it, but I don't know but at that particular exhibition that was in like right around Christmas, I realized that I had it on like a portable speaker, and I was like, oh, I'm like gonna walk around with this thing. I haven't done that yet, but I feel like that's like the next thing, but I'm terrified, which is probably good, but I'm terrified of like performative. Yeah, I don't know. But the Morse code stuff it first started out as like little drawings where I was like punching holes in paper in the pattern of Morse code. And the sound things, they keep happening, but I don't know exactly how they will evolve.
That's exciting. That's really
Yeah.
So Andrew's asking if you want the slides. Do you want the slides right now, or?
Oh, yeah, we can share them. I didn't see them.
We can share them whenever. Yeah, I mean, I think that we. So this. Okay, so this work was the first critique, right? Or was it? No, this was the second critique.
This was a second critique. Yeah. This is that text that I was saying I was waxing, but it's made out of like the stripes of an American flag and leftover cyanotype. So all this blue fabric is cyanotype that's been developed like outside, essentially. And the one on the left, what?
What does that mean again? I think you just said it, but I just wanted to.
Novus Ordo Seclorum. It's like, oh God, something of the masses. Okay. You're gonna make me look it up.
Okay.
Can't remember.
Well, I think you were.
But it's pulled. It's also pulled from it's on the seal of our like of the U.S. seal.
Yeah. Oh, okay, got it.
It's a motto. It's like one of the two mottos that it appears on the Great Seal. So it means a new order of the ages. I felt like, I mean, I made that in the summer. I feel like it was in some kind of, in my mind, it was like in relationship to stuff that was happening around the world at the time. But I mean, it was the summer of like protests and stuff. But I also feel like that is like the way that, well, at least I'm navigating the world is like a more, like I'm a person made up of vast and numerous stories, right, of people and time. So
yeah,
that's what I think about that way. Oh, this is that the circular form is that Ouroboros, the serpent, the sort of mother eating its tail, or the snake eating its tail is sort of what I was thinking about it. But this is the stuff I had at Grey Duck. And so the flags in the background are basically like a DNA breakdown of my parents and myself. And so then the remnants of those, my mother and myself make up the Ouroboros. So like sort of the mother eating its child or the child eating its mother, kind of digestion of heritage. And so these are those flags. So the other thing I think is really interesting when we talk about like the diaspora or like the complexity of people and heritage and time is the way that we think about history. So like my father's flag is like he's 100% of his background. It is like a closed circle of people. It's from a vast region of Europe, but he's Jewish and by heritage. And so when you look at the breakdown of someone who is Jewish descent, they're like 100%, which is strange because like no one's 100%.
So the yellow is your dad.
So the yellow is my dad. And so my flag is the one all the way to the right in the corner. So like I'm like half my dad and then half my mom.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's weird. I mean, it's not weird. It's just like we never see it this way, right? Or
yeah, I love the coding of it.
My mom and I were joking because I was having them do like DNA testing to sort of get the data and like use it. And the thing is, it's movable. So like, which I also think is really interesting, this idea, which kind of relates to like this piece. This is like 7, it's called De Donde Estoy, but like where I'm from or where you're from. So I grew up in like a bunch of different places. So these are like the flags of all those places as the one standard. And I think about that with like the other flags too. It's like, my mom was joking. She's like, I hope that the DNA doesn't say that, you know, some surprise will show up, because like people are doing these DNA tests and like, so surprises are, yeah. And so I thought that was hilarious, but I don't know. I like sort of getting this information from other places and sort of like filtering it through.
So I have a question about that. Okay, some of this work that you were making, as we were preparing for the exhibit at Grey Duck, like we were obviously going through like a very difficult election and a difficult time for the nation. Did any of that influence the outcome of what you were making?
I don't know. I'm sure it did. I don't think I thought about it in a direct way. I think, well, the way I think about it is this, like, being a kid in the military, and other people may have different views of this, but this is how I think about it. Like the most important thing other than the unit of my nuclear family was the fact that my father was in the Army. Like it dictated where we lived. It dictated like who we lived with. It dictated when he was home and when he was away. And so it was like a very primary thing, almost like in many ways, like that superseded everything else, religion, everything else. And so at least for me, like for I mean, I would be curious what my brother would say. I wonder how he would think about it in a slightly different way. But so I always thought about things from an ideological perspective. So I was always really interested in ideals and like ideas about like patriotism or like honor, or so to me, like that's the direct link between like flag language or like signaling correlates in my mind to this idea of, and even like why I would use Latin, right, from the Great Seal of the United States. So to think about like, what are we projecting? And in that way, I think, yeah, probably relates. Like, what do we project onto these ideals and what is real, right? They're different. They're in conflict with one another. But it's also the reason why I think we keep striving for things in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, so, oh yeah, this is
yeah.
So yeah, some of this work was, well, all the work that there's work that's batik combined with found fabrics. I later found out, I don't know if I told you this, Alex, but that purple swiping piece in the back,
Yeah.
that is my great grandfather's, a piece of my great grandfather's fabric, silk, from his silk factory in West Bengal.
Oh, wow.
And this was during the colonial period. You know, it was, so it's way back, and it's so interesting to me because I had no idea when I was picking up some of his stuff where it came from. And so I took my parents to the exhibit, and then they told me that. And it's interesting because that one, you know, in the back, as you go through the back and you kind of walk through, it's there's like this, like I said, like one of like elements of surprise, you know, as you're walking, just like something that you actually have to like duck further around or go to the other side to see. Yeah, that was just super exciting to me when I learned that. And I can't believe that silk is in such great condition still.
Yeah.
So it's like almost 200 years old.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you believe that? And so, and then as you're walking through, you know, that there's elements that are waxed and elements that are cut, and then also transfers onto the works based on what was happening for me at that current time. And for me, I definitely felt the influence of what was happening around me, and that was showing up in a lot of the work. And that's what showed up in this piece with at the end of it, which is there's voter registration forms in there, and just the gratitude to have that ability, and again, like the feeling of possible loss of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling this imminent loss of things, and it was a lot of grief that was coming out, and it wasn't even actually having lost the things, but the thought of losing things that was coming out in a lot of this work. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how it's continuing. So this is the one that you were telling, you were talking about that, I started moving off the wall.
Yeah.
And this was actually the thread count show that I did with a few other artists in February before the pandemic happened. And then I actually showed this in June for the first crit as well. But that was, that was starting to cut forms and putting it together. And you can see it's not as raw as I would have wanted it to be. It's very boxed in, right? So I can, and which is, I was having a hard time getting to that place, which I think continuously it's work in progress, right? And so, yeah. Oh, this is just a detail of that work. This is the batik part, which is I've left the wax on certain parts of it and then re-waxed it.
I love the wet when you leave the wax. And I think at the second crit you showed one that was made with turmeric.
Yeah.
God, man, that thing. I just can imagine, like, I don't know, like they have lots of like they can drape, or they can, you can like put them together, or you can have them be like these small things.
So this was washed once. That's how you see the white lines, but then I waxed it on top again. So yeah, but I know what you mean. Like it could take form, right? Which is
yeah.
I mean, and it's in like I feel like there's so many artists within Austin that have influenced like my work. I'm sure we can, just name all the different various beautiful exhibits that I've seen that have influenced how you approach something.
Yeah.
And there's so many. Oh yeah, this is a sculptural forum that I've been, this was before, going into the installation route, but you can see the sculptural forms taking form. And then I was also at the second crit when I had done the flower petals, like that was a just trying to figure out how to, and I still haven't figured that out actually.
Yeah, I like those though.
I still haven't figured out how I want to, what form I want that to be in. And so that's, I actually keep going back to it in my studio.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'll still continue going back to that and fiddling around with it. And then I get frustrated with it. And then I just like drop it and move on. And I'm just like, when it's going to come, but that form is going to come when it wants to come. It's just not, I can't figure out what that form is going to be yet. So I just, and it may not ever come actually. Like I say that it's going to come when it wants to come. It may not ever come, but I've been wanting to figure out how I can compile it together, because I have all these scraps from this thing with the cyanotype scraps, and I'm like,
oh yeah, like when I don't know what to do, I stitch them all together.
I might try.
I really do, because it's like kind of mindless sewing. I can just, and then it's like, oh yeah. I mean, actually, that's how I got to that really, really big. You can't tell the scale of it in that image that they showed, but it's like a 8x10 kind of a piece that I'm not sure. I just wanted to make. I felt like I wanted to make something big, but the only way I could start was like stitching scraps together, because I didn't know what else to do. So it's like kind of like working without thinking in a way, which is helpful. Yeah. But I like those forms.
I envision like these scraps to go into like something that's just like really methodical. I mean, not methodical, like just mundane. Like just a mundane. It's like, I don't know, tying knots or hanging something together that then the accumulation of it is what is exciting about it, rather than the actual single piece. And
yes,
so I haven't figured out what that is yet.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
of accumulate. Yeah, I mean, I think about that stuff all the time. I mean, that's how I think about like those like the sound pieces, or even just like other pieces with different materials. I think that's the same thing.
Yeah.
If I could break in here for a second, I would like to ask the attendees if you have any questions, please submit them now, and or any comments. And let's see. Let's see here. I'm getting the general vibe that everyone loves the work. Let's see here. Annette Carlozzi made a comment. That encounter with low-hanging fabric, clothes on a clothesline, for instance, occurs across lots of communities. I can remember it in Venice, for instance. To me, it conveys the experience of not being totally mechanized, automated here or there. So that's an interesting observation. And then
I always like, and
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, I always like Annette's comments, because like just that comment alone, we can be thinking about,
I know.
like thinking about that for 10 years.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, the conveyance of experience of not totally being mechanized, automated, I really could be thinking about that. And that's actually going to be something that is so helpful. And Annette is one of the leaders of the last crit group. And that to me will keep me kind of thinking, like Alex said, to get my work, I don't know, just thinking about it as I work, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I have a couple of questions actually, or observations. I really loved the comment earlier on this discussion about processes like metaphor, how the wax release technique, or wax resist technique, like you don't know what's going to happen all the ways. You know, there's an element of happenstance.
Yeah.
And that's a really great metaphor for life and how every day goes, you know. Yeah, do you have any comments about that, about the process?
That didn't even occur to me until yesterday, because I was actually just doing some research on another project I'm working on, and also Alex had asked me a question about how I started getting into Batik, and what about Batik versus painting, like the traditional role of painting versus, or the tradition of painting and Batik, because I see myself as a painter. I don't, and I think what really drove me to the Batik process is the use of the chanting. The chanting is like this tool where you scoop up the wax and it comes out. It's like a spout that comes out. The hot wax comes, and you control the movement of the wax and the flow of the wax through the temperature that the wax is at the time. And a lot of that can go wrong and unplanned, and if it's not planned correctly, and it's not reversible. Like that mark is going to be there. You can't change it, right? And it's going to cover. You can wash it out, but then you're washing out the whole thing, and so once that mark is made, you have to go with it. You know, like you have to move with it, and it has to go into the different directions. So I think that for me, I guess remembering that like it's permanent but not permanent, like nothing's really permanent. And I think that that whole idea of surprise at the end of what comes out as you continue down that path, like if I made a mark and then I can't change it, what am I going to turn that into?
Yeah.
Is something that I really like as an idea. And it was definitely a metaphor. And I think that that is, I'm definitely not a content person, you know, like I'm not a person that like, I'm always wanting the next exciting thing. And I think a lot of us are, right. And I feel like I want that element of surprise with something exciting happening again. And I think that's why the Batik is so exciting for me, you know?
That's excellent. Alexandra, how does that kind of like happenstance, how does that work its way through your work?
Well, I think the same, in the sense of like, if you like the cyanotype, I mean, well, first off, it's like, it's its own thing because sometimes it will oxidize in a way that you don't anticipate. And that could just be user error. But I also realize, like, I like the fact that I can make two different sides of one thing, or I can choose to manipulate just one side. But also the same, like if I put something down, depending on how much sunlight there is and how long it's been exposed, like I can't get rid of it, right? Or I can move it and create like gradients of objects if I like lay them down in a series, like in successive moments of time. But yeah, I also feel like the process itself, like it's so time, like there's so many steps involved in like creating the thing that anytime I do have scraps, I save them all and like those become something else. And so that sort of process of collection or making or like error, I think it filters into many of the ways that Rakhee and I've been talking about, like even just our own heritage and like the way that we are, but then also just like how we were thinking about what that means in our own work. And so it is a nice metaphor. I haven't really thought about it that way, but yeah, I like
I
it.
heard it and it really it put a, I don't know, it really got to me. Another question I have is the permission to be raw. That was a great comment earlier as well. Uh, where does that hang up come from? And also, how do we combat it? Like in your process, is that something you're consciously aware of, and you're like, okay, no, this is something that I've done a million times. I got to fight it. Like, tell us about that a little bit.
I mean, I think like if you have an active ongoing practice, I think you can like shut the voices down a little bit and you can kind of like make things. That's how surprises sometimes happen. But also too, I think fun things or unexpected things happen because you're just ready to go a different direction. Um, but yeah, rawness. I think it's like being willing to be like wrong. Like even this process of like going through preparation for this talk, it was like, oh my God, we're putting ourselves out there in a way that is different. Like, what does that mean? And so I think that's all part of it. And what we're making is real or honest for us. And so if it's, I think comes at, if it's come to that way, I think it is received that way on the other end. And then being vulnerable isn't bad, right? And being vulnerable isn't bad. It's just that you're vulnerable. So
Yeah.
you're exposing yourself in a way that maybe like, because we're always so guarded, especially like online lives and like whatever our Instagram feeds are like. But in some ways it's a facade. It's not real.
I think, I mean, gosh, this comes from such a like a a place of looking good, right? I mean, and Annie Arnold, who's also in the Crit group, talks about this in her work, and it's all about um, the perception and what you want to give to the world, and allow, like Alex said, allowing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable and just showing yourself a little more. I just feel like we don't have enough of that.
Yeah.
And but letting that guard down a little bit and giving yourself the permission, I don't know, but then what happens, like I have this conversation with my daughter all the time, who's now entering her teenage years, and she's like, I don't want to say anything that makes me look stupid, and it's just like, oh God. So here it begins, because when you're 3, you don't have that. When she was 3, she didn't have that issue,
Yeah. Yeah. But they do now. I mean, I'm dealing with the same thing, and it's like, gosh, yeah. I think that's actually really interesting because it's the homogenization of everything, which is exactly what we're in some ways like railing against, right? Like, and it's in the multitude is where the thing exists. And so it's like, how do you help like a young person do that and expose themselves at the same time as a tween? But an artist does that too, right? Like we're constantly.
Yeah. And both y'all's work is very deeply personal work too. I know that you have like that you know, the precious of the materials as well. Your grandfather's silk scarf, and that's a interesting thing. You know, I think most artists, they you know, they buy the paper, the pencils, the canvas, whatever, but rarely do they add this absolutely personal component to their work. And that's very powerful. That's very powerful. I guess we're just about out of time, and I want to thank you guys so much for coming and participating in this coffee chat this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to mention to our viewers that our next show is May 15th through June 22nd, and it's Hieronimo Reyes Retana, and he's presenting the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. And he's actually, I don't know if you guys could hear him or not, but he was diligently building this this fantastic piece behind me, well, in the gallery behind me. But yeah, I want to thank everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll sign off for now, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.
All right. Bye.